Nintendo.
And I'm Sega. This is Gumbo War!
Wait, so what exactly do you want us to do?
Fight the alien forces that have invaded Earth.
And why us?
Because of your experience with the aliens.
Experience with aliens?
Come on, come on, come on, come on. It's okay. Come on there.
No, officer, we haven't seen anything strange.
And who's your funny-looking friend?
Who's this? This is our friend Al. Alien. Yep, Alien. From France.
Dude, that's insane.
Al's so cool. Hey, you think Al's good looking?
Are you attracted to Al?
What? No! I meant other aliens. Do you think other aliens find Al attractive?
This is a really weird question, man. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. I'm just being weird. No, don't worry about it. It's a weird question. What a weird question. So you could buy your carrots already pre-shredded, but what I like to do is use the julienne. So I'm gonna go ahead and just grab that and... I'm sorry. I didn't mean to... What was I saying? The julienne! I'm gonna use the julienne. Yeah. I'm gonna use the julienne on the carrot. That's what I'm gonna do.
It's the most beautiful window I've ever seen.
So yeah, you know. Every time. You're part of me now. I got you in here.
Oh well, I've never known such happiness. Yeah, they got us a bottle. Okay, but how is that gonna help us fight aliens?
I wasn't talking about your weird alien menage a trois. I meant because both of you play lots of Xeno Crisis. Those are exactly the type of soldiers we need.
Oh, Xeno Crisis, right. I play it all the time for the Sega Genesis.
Right. But it's better for the Super Nintendo.
What? That's it? Are we doing this?
Was Spider-Man in the 90s animated series censored by Fox, where he was never allowed to be shown punching someone or allowed to hurt pigeons when landing on a roof? Yes.
Best Xeno Crisis.
Xeno Crisis is a homebrew, multi-directional shooter developed and published by Bitmap Bureau in 2019. The game received positive reviews upon release and has been ported to many consoles.
The game has been released for the Linux, Mac OS, Microsoft Windows, Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, Dreamcast, PS Vita, Neo Geo CD, N64, GameCube, and Evercade. Today we're looking at the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo games. It was released for Sega in October of 2019. It was released for Super Nintendo in April of 2024. Which version was better? Let's find out.
These games look incredibly similar.
Both games have the same top-down perspective. The characters are on the smaller side to account for the hordes of enemies you face. Because of that, main characters and enemies in both games are fairly simple in design. Bosses, however, are much larger and have lots of detail. All the characters in both games look the same.
Levels all look pretty much the same too. The individual rooms and layouts are randomly generated, but the concept is the same in both games. The 7 levels consist of the perimeter, the facility, the dunes, the nest, the forest, the lab, and the HQ. Very similar.
But there is one obvious difference. Let's talk about the screen resolution.
The Genesis has a resolution of 320 by 224. The Super Nintendo resolution is 256 by 224. What this basically means is that even though you see the whole room on Super Nintendo, everything is a bit stretched horizontally. You can really see this with the characters and the bosses. Even the quick cutscene in the beginning is stretched. So if you played this game when it first came out, the Super Nintendo looks a little wider.
Okay, so it's a little wider, but it looks just as good as your game, and there's actually some improvements. Let's look at the levels. Check out the nest. On Super Nintendo, there's a transparent fog effect. Don't have that on Sega. Now let's look at the forest. Looks pretty much the same. Oh wait, no, the Super Nintendo game has rain. Not a drop on Sega. Some cool environmental additions on Super Nintendo that don't slow the game down one bit.
Yeah, but you're still missing some details.
In the perimeter on Sega, you see lots of cracked walls, some with roots or possibly tentacles coming through. Those are a lot more rare in Super Nintendo. And it's usually just one, where the Sega can have many. Then on the dunes, the Sega game has these markings on the wall, like S1 or S2. A very small detail, but the Super Nintendo game's also missing these. Also, bosses are pretty much identical except for this one. On Super Nintendo, he had to be mirrored to save sprite memory, so he's entirely symmetrical on Super Nintendo. It makes his heart look a little funky. You see the true vision of the boss on Sega.
Okay, so I'm missing a few minor details, but my game still does something better than yours. Transparencies. The Super Nintendo has transparencies where the Sega game doesn't. You can see this with the muzzle flashes and explosions. The most obvious transparency is the final level. You can clearly see through these enemies on Super Nintendo. On Sega, the enemies just look like different parts of the floor and lack any transparency. The Super Nintendo game might be stretched and missing some minor details, but they definitely made some major improvements. For adding the elements and having more transparencies, best graphics go to Super Nintendo! Now our presentation is identical. Both games have the same opening cutscenes, same character select, same cutscenes between levels, same continue/game over screens, same endings, same credits, and same final tally screen. Not to mention that both games also have the same title screen that changes color depending on the difficulty you choose.
Both games also have the same HUDs in that there are none. Everything about your character appears over their heads. You see the number of lives when you die, number of bullets when you're running out, number of grenades when they're used, and the number of dog tags when you collect one. And the bosses all have life bars.
The only major difference is when you get to a boss, they say different things. Neither one's really better, they're just different. I mean, everything else is pretty much identical.
Not everything. Probably the most important thing.
You're not really gonna get
That's right, let's talk about the font.
The font on Sega is much bigger than Super Nintendo, whether it's the name of the level, when you clear a room, when you arrive at a boss, when you clear an area, when you get a game over, or when you use a continue.
Oh, you want to talk fonts? Come on! Let's talk fonts! Let's look at the cutscenes. There, the Super Nintendo font is larger. Not as big a difference as during the gameplay, but it's still noticeable. Did we really just argue about font size?
Sure did.
Ty?
The games have the same HUDs,
And all the same cutscenes.
some different words,
And some different font sizes.
but overall,
Presentation is a tie. Both of our music is by Savage Regime, so for the first time, our music is identical.
No, it's not. The Sega game generates music itself using the YMK2612 sound chip, while the Super Nintendo samples music at 26 kilohertz.
Those sound exactly the same to me.
Well, then, I feel bad for you.
Alright, well, maybe we should move on to sound effects. Specifically, voiceovers. Here's the opening cutscene on Sega. It's fine, I guess. Now, here's the opening cutscene on Super Nintendo.
Commander Darius, we have a code red distress signal from Outpost 88.
That's right! The entire opening cutscene on Super Nintendo has voiceovers.
Dispatch a squad of our finest Marines.
Yeah, but it's only your opening cutscene, and you probably just skip it every time you replay the game.
Okay then, my game has way more voiceovers during gameplay. There are so many more voiceovers in the Super Nintendo game. Voiceovers for selecting a player,
Right. Make your selection.
starting a level,
Looks like you're in for a fight.
when you get a weapon,
Hard shot.
when you get to a boss,
What a monster.
when you use a continue,
Continue.
and random voiceovers sprinkled throughout.
Thank you. The heroes.
The Sega game has none of these. Music is basically the same, but the Super Nintendo dominates with voiceovers. For having voiceovers in the opening cutscene,
I have a bad feeling about this.
and many voiceovers during gameplay,
Look at the size of that thing.
best sound goes to Super Nintendo.
Gameplay is very similar too.
Like we said before, both games are top-down shooters. It's similar to Super Smash TV.
On Super Nintendo, at least.
The face buttons determine what direction you fire, up, down, left, or right.
Use the 6-button controller, Sega fans.
Hold down 2 adjacent buttons to shoot at an angle. There's also one button to throw a grenade, and another to roll.
Also, like Super Smash TV, you can get many different types of weapons. Your primary gun has limited ammo that you need to refill. Don't worry though, because ammo pops up whenever you're low. The additional weapons have unlimited ammo, however, you only get these weapons for a limited amount of time. Then it automatically goes back to your primary weapon. If you don't like the new gun, you can manually discard it.
Other power-ups you can get are medkits for more lives, grenades, security cards, and dog tags.
Dog tags let you purchase upgrades. This becomes available after beating a level. You can upgrade your health, weapon power, ammo limit, grenade power, grenade limit, player speed, gas mask, and continues.
Like we said before, the levels are randomly generated. The objective is to eliminate all your enemies. Once you do, you can proceed to the next room. 6 of the 7 levels end with a boss fight.
Both games also have hostages. It's important to free them as soon as possible because the power-ups aren't available until they're rescued.
Both games are also 1 or 2 player. In 2-player mode, one cool feature is the ability to revive the other player if they've used up all their lives. You have to wait a few seconds, but every time they go down, you can keep reviving them. It doesn't cost any lives and prolongs the need to use any continues. However, during boss fights, once they're down, they stay down.
Fun games, but definitely not easy.
Yeah, they're pretty difficult.
These are not games you're likely to beat on your first try. It has one-hit kills. Once you use up all your lives, then it's game over. You do have continues, but they're limited. No saving or checkpoints either, so once you're done, you gotta start over from the beginning. But they are fairly short games.
You only have 2 difficulties, easy and hard, but don't be fooled because the game is still plenty difficult in easy mode.
This game's not just hard, it can be unforgiving. You might be able to make it through all 7 levels, you might be able to make it all the way to the final boss. But if you use just one continue, you know what happens? Instant game over. The only way to actually fight the final boss and see the ending and credits is to get through the entire game without using one continue. Or certain cheat codes. Like we said, these games are difficult.
That pretty much sums up the games.
Right, but mine's better, because remember the screen resolution?
The screen resolution does affect gameplay because in the Sega game, essentially you have more space. You have more room horizontally. This makes the Sega game easier because you have more space to avoid getting hit. A tighter Super Nintendo game makes it a little more difficult to avoid attacks.
And one more little thing.
In the Sega game, there can be multiple hostages you have to save in a room. Due to limitations, the Super Nintendo game can only have 1 hostage per room.
So, hostages don't matter.
Yeah they do.
Do they give you power-ups?
No,
Do they give you points?
I don't think so.
Right, so you just have to free them so you can get your power-ups. So having more of them makes your game harder.
Technically, yes. But your game's still limited.
Okay, I'll concede there, but I still want to talk about major improvements in my game. One major improvement was made to the roll ability. On Super Nintendo, you can roll while holding down the shoot button. On Sega, you can't. The ability to roll while shooting keeps the action going. You don't have to go from shoot to roll back to shoot. It lets you spare split seconds, which in this game is incredibly important. And even if you could roll while shooting on Sega, the layout of the controller makes it so you'd have to put your fingers in this awkward position. The Super Nintendo controller uses the R button to roll, which makes it easy to hold shoot. And let's talk about grenades. You can use them while shooting in both games. On Super Nintendo, the L button is used for grenades, so using them while shooting is easy. On Sega, you need to use that awkward hand position thing again if you want to throw grenades while shooting. Even the layout of the buttons on the Super Nintendo was more like a D-pad, which makes shooting in the proper direction a little easier. And just a couple more things. Both games show you the high score every time you beat a level. On Sega, it resets every time you turn the game off. The Super Nintendo, on the other hand, saves the high score. And high score is not the only thing it saves. All the settings in the option menu are also saved on Super Nintendo. I'm talking difficulty, audio preferences, control scheme, and even language. No settings are saved on Sega.
Yeah, but the Super Nintendo uses the RP2040 enhancement chip just to keep up with the Sega game.
Yeah, so you gotta use the 32X to play Doom. The Super Nintendo is lacking some things, but enough improvements were made where it gave it the edge in gameplay. For being able to roll while shooting, an overall better controller layout, and saving high scores and all the settings, best gameplay goes to Super Nintendo! Both games are good, but one's better, and that's Xeno Crisis on the Super Nintendo. It has better graphics with the elements and more transparencies. It pretty much has the same presentation, it has better sound with more voiceovers and sound effects, and it has better gameplay with the ability to roll while shooting, better controller layout, and saving high score and settings. The Sega game is fine. Honestly, you'll have a good time playing either game. But since both games are the same price, it makes more sense to get the Super Nintendo version, which has just a little bit more. Best Xeno Crisis goes to Super Nintendo!
My game's still fun.
Of course it is. Now buck up. Time to take on some alien invaders.
Wait a second. Al? Al! Oh no, Al! Oh, don't leave me! Oh, I forgive you, Al! Don't worry about it! We're gonna patch you up, we'll make you all good, okay? And then we can hang out and play lots of Sega Genesis, okay? 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 Super Nintendo? Oh, you're dead to me.
Thanks for checking out our latest video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our Patreon for early releases, behind the scenes, commentary, bloopers, deleted scenes, and the Discord. Special thanks to developers Bitmap Bureau for the donation of both games and for all their help, like those Super Nintendo cheat codes. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram for more console wars goodness. Later!
Ace Ventura, Part 2, coming out of the Rhino.
Freedom!
Alright,
The little Houdini.
all good.